Okay, I think we'll just start. So, welcome to this Tech For Lunch Meetup. So first a bit about us, then about the subject, and then we'll jump more into some demos. So, who are Forte Digital? We are a multidisciplinary consultancy based out of Oslo, Norway, and Krakow, Poland. And we have three main departments, meaning the strategy, experience, and the technology department. And I'm Thomas Holtetveit. I work as a chief architect at Forte Technology. So what do? We help ambitious companies with scaling and growth through digital success. And by that, we try to be a part of both understanding what's the problem that our customer is facing, and then how we together can solve it. And we therefore try to have as many long-term relationships with our customers as possible so that we can truly understand and help them. Of course, these numbers are already outdated, but at the end of 2021, we were about 210 employees, distributed between 130-ish in Oslo and about 80 in Krakow. And we want to be a workplace where people want to stay and grow. So to the topic of the day, tSQLt meets Azure. So and before I do anything else, I want to thank our sponsors, Microsoft and Redgate. I will be giving away a free license of a Redgate tool belt to the best question, and we will also give away some Microsoft swag also to the best question. We will have a bit more about this at the end. So why are we doing this? Well, automated testing is required in Agile and DevOps. It's really hard to move fast if you don't have the support that test provides you. Why do we want a unit test database? Why having logic in the database at all? And there are some pros. You have locality or cohesion, so that things that are that should be or could be very close to the data can stay there, and for changes you could do changes in one place and not having to worry that you will have to move this through your entire stack. There could also be performance reasons, and in many cases also legacy reasons why you want to have logic in your database. Perhaps you have an old system with a lot of stored procedures, or it could be one of the other reasons listed. But what about cons? Well, it has been very hard to version and to test. The tooling hasn't really been that great, and it's been lacking in isolation and mocking, so that you could be sure that you're not messing with whatever else in the database, because you really don't want to drop any production tables. So tSQLt. It's an open source unit test and mocking framework that allows you to both have the test runner and to have the individual unit tests, as well as a lot of helper functions or procedures in the database that you can lean on to do the actual unit tests, which we will come back to in the demo. So typically you have an act arrange, you have arrange, act, assert when you do a unit test. So on the arrange part, you have the most important thing, the most important functions you have are fake functions, fake tables, a fake table, and spy procedure. The first two will simply allow you to substitute a function or table or view in the production or test or development database with something else. That's really up to you. The spy procedure allows you to not only intercept a call, but it will also allow you to log to a table what are the inputs that actually came into it, and could be very helpful in terms of monitoring a large system where you perhaps don't understand everything that's going on. So act, well, we don't really need any support here. Here you would do whatever call you actually want to test. Typically a store procedure call or testing some function, because after all, unit tests typically tests some development unit, some unit of code or unit of logic. On the Azure part, there are a lot of interesting helpers. Of course, as usual, try to keep the asserts as clean as possible and don't try to test too many things at the same time. But you have a lot of options in terms of what you want to check for, both checking some output, but you could also check not just return values, but you could also check that some table is actually what you expect them to be. And there are a lot of good documentation on the official website, which is tSQLt.org. But before we go into the to demos, I want to warn you about a few pitfalls. So the number one is perhaps the most important. Only ever run the test through tSQLt. If you have because the unit tests are simply stored procedures, so you could put whatever there that you would do in any other stored procedure. But if you have such a test that, for example, drops a production table, well, if you run that test manually, you will drop that production table. And that's not what you want, because tSQLt, it runs whatever you want in a transaction. And so whatever you do is only visible to yourself, and everything is rolled back and in the end, so there are no real side effects. But of course, if you run the tests without that framework around it, it will do whatever you put there. So really keep that in mind. I've seen that happen a few times in fortunately only in development, but it can be very painful, so don't do that. The other part about schema binding is a bit more on the annoying side, because you can't mock or fake a table or store procedure or whatever if there's a schema binding in place, and the same thing comes into effect on the external dependencies. So you can only also mock things that are inside the one database that you have your test in. There are certainly a lot of ways around it, but these typically affect how you could or would structure your store procedure or function or whatever. So just be advised that there are workarounds for this, and there's documentation also on tSQLt on how you can do that. But if you see schema binding whenever you have something you're testing on, keep that in mind. So let's jump to the demo. And I'm going now to first to Management Studio. And then we will also jump to Visual Studio after that. So we have here Management Studio. I've just installed also the Redgate tool belt in a trial. You can do this completely using open source and using the management studio, just vanilla. You don't have to add anything yourself, or besides that. But SQL Test, which is Redgate's commercial offering around tSQLt, does provide a lot of help. So you could easily here create a new test and have a nice test runner. But whatever this is doing, you can do yourself in just calling the stored procedures yourself. So as I said earlier, one of the pitfalls: never run these manually. Never do that. But you can run the calls to actually you can run these, run all. These are perfectly safe to run manually. So let's try to do that and see what happens. And then we'll of course have to go into the individual tests and see how they work. So no error, and we ran 2 tests, which was the same that we saw in the SQL test tab. So let's go here and take a look at these tests individually. So here, this is probably the simplest test you could do. The reason why I had this test at all was simply to test my continuous integration configuration, which we will take a look at afterwards. But on the bit more complex one, or where we actually have some logic at all, here we can see that we are using the fake table. I'm just gonna enhance the screen a bit. And what this does is that it's whenever this test is running, we will have a test double or a mocked version of fake table. So in this table, I could insert whatever I want, and this is exactly what this test procedure that I'm going to mock, where I'm going to actually verify, to test. So if we take a look at this procedure, it takes a parameter and inserts it into table 4. So, and running this, we have a hard-coded value that we are expecting. We're sending it in, and we assert that it's the same one that got back. So of course, if we ran this test sp manually, that table 4 would actually be affected. But what actually happens if we run this test? We just ran it, so we know that if there's something in that table, the isolation is not working. So let's take a look. And table 4 is completely empty. So whatever side effects that appeared to be happening did actually not occur. And this can be done to test almost any type of logic that you have in your database. And I've been using this for 3-4 years now, with some quite heavy logic in my previous company, and it provided us a very, very nice safety net that allowed us to move forward in a DevOps manner. But unfortunately, at that time, we did not have an integration with this into our continuous integration pipeline, and that was the reason I wanted to have this talk, so I could do some investigation on how that could be done. So let's jump over to Visual Studio, and we will take a look at the GitHub Action continuous integration configuration, or the pipeline configuration. This is the same that I presented on my previous meetup, but with the added addition of running these tests as well as a part of the pipeline. So we have some checks on where this pipeline should be triggered, what it's going to be running on, and the interesting part comes on the deployment stage. So we first do the Flyway migration. And for those who didn't attend the previous meetup, Flyway is an open source offering from Redgate that allows you to have a migration-based deployment of changes, or SQL source control. And in this case, I'm running the Docker image with a given folder that contains all of my migration scripts, which is in the SQL folder under my repository. And I'm pointing it to a given database connection. And I'm telling it to migrate. So that means that I can check in all my tests along with all my other SQL code and have that pushed up to have that deployed as a part of my integration pipeline. So far, so good. But I also want to run this. I also want to actually run the tests. And what's nice about the GitHub runners is that they have built-in support for PowerShell. So what I did is that I called the install module for SQL Server, and then I simply invoked a SQL command, which is the same call that you saw me running in Management Studio. It's the tSQLt run all store procedure, and I passed it a connection string. And then I said that I wanted to have verbose output, a data set. All of these things can be configured in how you want to pick it up. And I'm outputting, and I'm redirecting all output to a given text file. And later I'm picking up that text file and running it on and saving it as an artifact. So let's take a look at how this would work. So we have the first test that I mentioned that was of the simple nature, and we're saying, yeah, one should be one. Yeah, it doesn't really provide much value, but let's actually try to change this and see what happens when we push this to GitHub. And let's now jump over to the browser, and we will take a look at the GitHub Actions. See if it has been picked up yet. Yes. Okay, it's starting. So yeah, we have the first build, and nothing is really happening for that we care about now on that stage. So we only have interesting parts in the deployment stage. So let's see what goes on. We can just take a look here. We don't have anything else to do anyway, do we? So yeah, .NET publish, artifact, yeah, quite straightforward. But we're soon over to the deployment stage, and here more interesting things are happening. If we can, yeah, right. So So we're running the Docker image. So of course it had to pull the image. You could of course create your own that would be pre-built so that it could be or your own. You can also have your own runner and whatever. And we can see here it did actually migrate a repeatable action, because Flyway checks the checksum of your repeatable migrations. So whenever they change, they will be applied. Good. So that meant that our test was changed. And then we're trying to run the unit tests, tSQLt, and here we see, oh, it's failing. We were expecting one. Well, actually, it doesn't actually give us the detail here, but if we go to, but at least it stops us. So this can of course be improved. For now, since I've redirected the output, I lost a bit more on the details on this part, but it is now visible if I download the artifact. But it's not something that at least you will stop the pipeline now, but it's really up to you. I mean, this was a very trivial PowerShell implementation on how to do this or how to implement it, but really only your imagination will prevent you from integrating this into whatever DevOps pipeline that you have. So let's make the test work again, but we're not going to monitor this more closely than that. So going back to Visual Studio, let's just set this to 1 again, and let's push this over to GitHub again. Of course, working in a production database, you probably want this on a different branch, and you have, of course, the full possibility of running these only in certain environments or in certain branches or for pull requests. So there's a lot of different options that you could do. This was only to keep it simple. And moving forward now, I think we can move back to the PowerPoint presentation, and I think we rather complete the main topics that we want to cover here. There's a lot of different details on how to do the individual tests, best practices, and so on. And there's a lot of good content out there. But I want to know, is there anyone who's actually used this? And if so, what's your experience? Yeah, it's certainly a powerful tool, and of course, it's not something that I would necessarily recommend to put this type of logic in the database, but it is quite common, and you want to have the security net that tests provide you. So it will certainly be a help. It could be a very powerful tool in your toolbox to have a better DevOps pipeline and to make things safer. Yeah, exactly, and that was the scenario that I came in about 4 years ago, where we had where we had extremely complex systems built on SQL Server and practically no tests. And of course, it was very easy to make mistakes. But with this, we were able to work around whatever of these problems in SQL Server to actually to be able to do really complex refactorations and extensions without having to fear. Yeah, absolutely. I do agree that in many cases it's much better to ensure that you have sufficient test coverage. You may want to do this upfront, or you may want to do this gradually, but you definitely want to start that process. And also, there's a reason why the NoSQL originally stood for not only. That SQL Server can be a very good tool, especially considering how easy it is to do this in Azure, where you could just spin up and you could have this as a service. So that makes it a interesting offer, and it could be a good data store even for modern architectures. But you typically want to have at least have all the domains isolated so that one microservice only have one particular database. But of course, that can be hard to break up the monolith. But at least this could be a really powerful tool to do so. Any other questions? Okay. I'm moving forward to the links now, and here's the link to the GitHub repo, my LinkedIn profile, and my email address. So we are always looking for talented developers. So if you want to, if this sounds interesting, not only what presented on this individual meetup, but also on our entire community, then reach out and let's see if we can work together. So back to some info from our sponsors. So here is the link to Azure Data Fundamentals. I can really recommend that. It's a very good certification that I took myself now this last fall. And check it out. It's a lot of, they have awesome information and knowledge that you could access for free on Learn. So really check that out. And I would also like to give a shout out to Redgate, that is providing us, that has been sponsoring our talks and providing us with some free licenses. So thank you again, both. And with that, thank you. No other questions? Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yep. Bye.